you. Welcome. Laura, could you do a roll call for us?
Yes, sir. Becky Bowler,
Here.
Vic Vasilino,
Present.
Diane Milheim,
Here.
Ryan Neve,
Here.
Clark Patton,
Here.
George Stanziel, and Jeff Frigdenhill.
Here.
And we have our quorum.
All right, very good. Yeah, hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at the agenda. Does anybody have any additions or alterations, or entertain a motion to approve as presented?
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, very good. We have our agenda. Now we have the minutes from our previous meeting. Thank you for those. Anybody have any comments on the minutes? Okay. Anyone care to make a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
Thank you, Vic. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Now, public comment. If anyone would like to comment, please, now's the chance. I don't know, has anybody signed up for public comment? All right. And I don't believe either of our items of new business will have a public comment portion to them. All right. Not seeing anyone, we'll go on to item 1 of new business about Kelly Lane.
Good evening. The first request tonight is a small subdivision in the ETJ. All my documentation up until this point has identified it as Kelly Lane, but it is in fact Kelly Drive.
Okay.
So I wanted to point that out, and everything will be corrected in the future. All right. Jonathan McDaniel of Tidewater Associates, agent for property owner Pamela Ann Smith Kelly, has requested to subdivide the 7.32 acre parcel addressed as 153 Kelly Drive into 2 parcels. Am I up and running yet? You have everything in the packet to follow along with. On the property currently, there's a single-family home with a small accessory structure towards the back of the property, as well as a larger accessory structure towards the front, and there's an existing private road, Kelly Drive. So I had the aerial over here so that we could see the existing structures in the existing drive. The proposed subdivision is to divide one tract into 2 tracts. We've got tract A, which is 4.97 acres with the existing single-family home, and tract B, which is 2.35 acres, which is the existing accessory structure towards the front, to become a new single-family home. This process does meet the statutory definition for subdivision, so this whole review procedure applies, but in our ordinance updates and the creation of the UDO, we hope to include a procedure for minor subdivision, which is something that sets out in 160D that we can do for an expedited review for certain subdivisions. So things like this in the future may have an expedited review process. So Planning Board could make a recommendation tonight to be received at the August 12th Board of Commissioners meeting to recommend approval of the plat or recommend denial of the request. Are there any questions for staff at this time?
Michelle, could you go back to the preliminary suggested plat, please? Thank you. Kelly Drive exists now, and each lot have frontage on Kelly Drive, is that right?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
And tract A is where the existing house is.
Yes, sir. I've got
Oh,
the
there you go.
Yep, right there.
I've got the aerial. You'll see there's kind of a ditch line that is east of Kelly Drive, And that's approximately where that lot line would be placed. That's where the subdivision is proposed.
Michelle, so they're not changing the egress at all onto 70? It's still going to stay to 1?
Correct. They've
Okay.
got the existing Kelly Drive, and that's going to stay that way. Yes,
Could
sir.
I clarify again, Kelly Drive is not a dedicated right-of-way or anything. It is just simply a part of this parcel.
Right, it's a private road via easement. Is that the correct way to say it?
Looks like it would be an easement,
Okay.
private road for our purposes.
So this is a flag lot that we're creating because its only frontage is on Route 70 across the front of Kelly Drive, correct?
No, it wouldn't have a flagpole portion. So Tract B would have frontage on 70 and Kelly, and Tract A would just have Kelly.
So will there be an easement for Tract A to use Kelly Drive?
Yes, and that is existing. It's hard to see here, but there are the two kind of green dotted lines that go through and show the Kelly Drive, and that's existing currently.
So who will maintain Kelly Drive?
That is a good question for our applicant. Jonathan McDaniel is present tonight, and I think he could speak to that a little bit.
Okay.
Are there any further questions for staff before we bring up the applicant to discuss it? Okay.
No, thank you.
Oops.
All right, if the applicant's here, come up and for the record, state your name and address. Good.
Hi, I'm Jonathan McDaniel with Tidewater Associates. We are 1069 Cedar Point Boulevard. And yes, I mean, Kelly Drive is an existing easement because also address 167 is served by Kelly Drives. So really be 3 property owners that are served by a private lane, and they will share maintenance amongst themselves as needed. An easement's dedicated to A through this process.
So what are the 3 properties that will share it?
It'd be Tract A, Tract B, and then to the north, which is a rectangle shape. It's just another existing home there. That's 167 address, 167 Kelly Drive. Not affiliated with anything with this minor division.
And they currently use it?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay, and there's an easement
Yes.
already drawn up for Kelly
Yeah,
Drive?
Yeah, because that's how the 167 address is served. Because before this division, they'd have to drive through the total of Tract A and B.
I'm sorry, where is the third party? You said to the north.
Yeah, so like I guess
Can
the
you go back to
bottom,
the aerial photo?
the bottom of the screen.
Oh, they come in and then they turn to the right and they come all the way down to the bottom?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's like the dash line, it's just an edge liner not affiliated with the map.
Right, and there's no agreement as to maintenance at this time?
Not that I'm aware of. It's usually a handshake is
Right.
Right,
typically
if you
how
wanna
these,
get in, you better
when 2 people
chip
share
in.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions?
Questions, yeah? No, I don't believe so. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right. Any further questions of staff or discussion? Any? No, it seems fairly straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
We want to try out a motion?
I make a motion that we approve the application for subdivision of 153 Kelly Drive as presented.
Thank you, Vic.
And I'll second that motion.
All right, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
No.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, thank you. On to the next.
All right, moving on to our next agenda item, we have a special use permit request for dry boat storage at 609 Highway 101. John Wade of Arundel Engineers and Tom Owens of Copeland Road Property LLC has requested the special use permit to construct and operate dry boat storage at 609 Highway 101. This is a 13.36 acre parcel between and having access on Copeland Road and Highway 101. Dry boat storage is a special use in the R20 zoning district. The property is currently undeveloped but has undergone some vegetation removal, both to clear some of the site as well as to open up the drainage ditches that surround the property. The proposed project includes the following components: 239 unpaved parking spaces, which are comprised of 220 40-foot-long spaces and 19 50-foot-long spaces, all for boat storage. 2 concrete driveway entrances off 101 in Copeland with retractable gate openings. 20-foot wide gravel driveways and drive aisles. 12-foot tall downward-facing pole lights, so that's the box downward face. A washdown area for boats, fire hydrant, a 21-foot wide landscape buffer, including a 6-foot chain link fence with barbed wire, 7 gates surrounding the property, existing drainage ditches, and then an alternate buffer landscaping, which is allowed to accommodate for those drainage ditches that are existing. They're proposing 627 Nellie Stevens holly trees, spaced at 6 foot on center to provide the opaque buffer, but allow for that continued drainage maintenance. I will note that the northwest corner of the project is within the AE6 special flood hazard area. The town's floodplain manager has reviewed the project as part of our TRC. But this kind of low intensity, no structure, no paving with drainage ditches is one of the kinds of commercial uses that's good to have in a floodplain like that. So there is no issue from the floodplain manager's point of view with this kind of development in the floodplain. Additionally, both accesses are outside of the floodplain, so that's always good to see. We have a new submission, a project phasing map, which the applicant is prepared to discuss kind of the construction sequence for the project, so I'll let them discuss that a little bit more. I've got the PDF that we can expand if we need to take a look at that, but I'll let them talk about that a little bit more, the anticipated phasing of construction for that project. So as we know from recent time, Section 20 requires that for a special use permit to be approved, all the LDO standards must be met as well as our required findings. And so I've got our required findings there on the slide again. Staff does not give recommendations on the special use permits or the required findings, but we do advise on conformity with plans. So I do want to point out our land use plan identifies this as rural/working lands, future land use classification. Typically a agricultural sort of area, low density residential, if anything, but I'll point out that it does say it includes areas that are vacant or used for hunting or other non-residential, non-urban areas, and further discusses low use of utilities and services. So staff would contend that this meets the land use plan, future land use classification for that parcel. And as we know, we can have some conditions if needed to bring things into compliance with those required findings. Staff acknowledges the importance of those drainage ditches in the area and the fencing and buffering that's going to be important for that use. So if conditions are discussed, I think those would be appropriate conditions to talk about. If there are any further questions for staff at this time, I can take those. Otherwise, I think it would be helpful to hear from the applicant and the engineer for the project.
I do have one, Michelle.
Yes, sir.
Can you go back? Where is that? No, back. Where'd it go? It was used, there was a comment on there about not using police, fire, or rescue.
Okay. So in the
Right.
in the
Yeah, right
Cayman
there,
land
last
use plan,
line.
yes. So it's saying limiting residential density is going to reduce an area's reliance on services. So, and that's kind of a general statement as well, but it's saying that areas like this, and in the future land use classification, we're seeing these on like farmlands and things like that. So we don't want to have density in those areas, residential density, commercial density, things like that, because soils may not be suitable for septic. We maybe don't want to extend that far out with our services. So things that are non-residential, non-urban uses. That's why it's calling that out, and it's kind of explaining why.
Okay, it caught my eye, like, that,
So it's saying,
restricting the use of the water, or the fire,
Yeah, well, it's
fire
saying-
police emergencies, like, if someone's out there and they get hurt, that,
maintaining rural character.
the character,
to
okay.
maximize use of public services in the city center or in the residential areas, rather than extending it far out where we don't necessarily need to extend it to. That's what that future land use classification is kind of getting at.
okay.
Mhm.
Got it.
I have a question too.
Yes.
Michelle, when applications are delivered to our planning team, I'm looking at our current ordinances, so specifically page 147, which talks about tree preservation. So when you all receive applications, what's the process for ensuring that the tree preservation ordinances are met in terms of the application?
And that's one of the tough things is our tree preservation ordinance currently, if you're using trees as credit towards your landscaping, then we've got to identify the trees that are being preserved, identify the caliper, get a stock of what we're actually asking for credit for. But otherwise, if we're not asking for tree preservation credit for something, then we're not working towards any of those survey requirements. And that's something I think in our updated UDO, we'll be looking more towards stringent requirements on requiring tree preservation or a certain percentage depending on the parcel, and it's so site by site that it gets to be tricky. But at least for this parcel, we're not looking for any tree preservation requirements. They're not asking for any tree preservation because it wouldn't work with the drainage work that they're trying to do on the outside landscaping, and that's pretty common, especially projects like the townhomes that we looked at or the mini storage that we looked at where there's significant grading happening where they can't preserve trees because of the grading that's required in order to be able to put in the stormwater infrastructure. Luckily here, the grading's not required because they're kind of got that flat land that they're already needing, but in order to maintain the drainage in that area, which greatly affects the neighboring properties, they're not preserving the trees on the interior.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
So in this particular piece, I went out there and looked at it. I mean, it's already completely cleared and the entrance aprons are in, the silt fence is in, and the drainage ditches are cut, at least for part of it. I didn't go around the whole entire piece. Is there anything in our regulations about when a project can start? I mean, they're theoretically well underway, and this is now just coming to us. Is there currently anything in our LDO to regulate that?
As far as land disturbance, like cutting trees and things like that, and that's going to be subject to state permitting, any requirements as far as that's concerned. So I think that's something that we could look at in the future, especially as we're wanting to look more into fill regulations and things. So we'll have a chance to look at more at phasing of projects and affecting the level of land as the project comes forward before maybe it comes to a board to look at the use.
Right. And I've not been on the planning board that long. This is the first time this is coming to us. There's no history of this.
Correct.
Prior to tonight.
Yes.
Okay.
Do we, future plans, a couple months back, we had the applicant come in to subdivide his land across the street, across 101.
Yes.
And then, so the extension of the airport runway, the drawings I've seen with Copeland Road, does that take that entrance away?
We don't know exactly where that reroute is gonna go, but it would maybe put this towards the end of a cul-de-sac sort of deal, but we don't have, DOT is quite a ways out from formalizing their plans. But we do know that the airport runway is gonna be coming in to kind of cut off 101 somewhere between there and 70.
Yes.
And that's something that Mr. Owens is aware of and is taking into account with his plans.
So that'll give it one entrance, and they'll just be on 101?
They would continue to have their entrance on Copeland. I don't anticipate that the airport subdivision is going to affect that far up Copeland. I think it would be, come down,
Couple lots before?
yeah, and come around the side.
And that's a 2-lane still, where the egress is on 101 for the boats and the trucks to be going on to. And the police department was fine with the traffic control and.
They
when
presented
they
no
did
issues
their
at TRC.
study?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes, sir?
This is in an R20 zone, and it has a lot of perimeter R20 properties. Have you heard from any of those people?
We have not, but Mr. Owens has reached out to all of the adjacent property owners, and that's prior to application, prior to us sending letters for the commissioners' hearing. So that's usually something we like to hear from a developer, that they're already reaching out to those folks. And so I'll let him talk a little bit more about the conversations he's had with those adjacent property owners. But the drainage ditches that surround that project drain a lot of that area. So his work to clear those drainage ditches, whether they're fully or partially on his property, maintenance of that drainage is going to vastly help those neighboring properties, which is why I think that's something that, could be a good condition to help the neighborhood to stay dry.
Yep. And the plan mentions an alternative buffer. Why is it an alternative buffer?
It is not the same as would be required, like a type A buffer.
Yep.
The ordinance, you can vary only if there's certain specific standards set out, and it does identify an alternate buffer that's allowed if you've got adjacent drainage ditches. So we can't put big trees right next to the drainage ditch because it's going to undermine it, and it wouldn't be workable. So it allows for an alternate opaque buffer that lets the drainage ditch still do its job, and we've still got that opaque buffer that we need to see. So it sets out in the ordinance that for drainage areas, we're allowed to have a kind of alternate buffer. And I think discussion of some of those species might be something that we want to talk about. And Mr. Owens knows that that's, he's not married to the Nellie Stevens Holly, and I think that that's something that we could take a look at. As long as we've got that opacity that's going to meet the intent of that type A buffer, and we've got, a certain on-center, and with the height that we need, then we can go different on the species, as long as we've got the frequency that's going to provide that cover.
And so just so I understand it, where we see what look like the small circles, that's where the 627 hollies are proposed to go. But what about, if I'm correct, what about though around the fencing? Will there also be a landscape buffer hiding the fence?
What looks like a black line, that is the hollies.
Okay.
So that's the hollies in front of the fencing. The little circles, those are the gates that they'll have so they can get to the other side for the drainage maintenance. But there's, a couple little gate spots that you can see around, but that the gray area is their landscaping buffer area, which includes some or all of drainage ditches depending on the area. And then what looks like a black line around the whole area, that's
Those
their,
are the hollies.
yes.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Mhm.
Any other questions before I have a few questions.
Okay.
And clarifications, just, so this is in the ETJ, so any.
It's in city limits.
Hmm?
Yeah, it is city limits.
Yeah.
Oh, it's within the city limits?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so Beaufort Police would cover this?
Yes.
property, okay. Have they, have you talked to them about the acceleration and deceleration of boats entering this property
Right.
from 101?
It's in ETJ, it's not in the city limits.
It's not?
Oh, it's not.
This is an extraterritorial.
It is
Okay,
ETJ?
it is in, okay, that's what I thought. So being that it's in the ETJ and not within the city limits, the Beaufort Police wouldn't be responding to things here unless they were, I mean, the primary police
The sheriff's office.
would be the sheriff's office, okay. So, which is probably why the police wouldn't render an opinion on acceleration and deceleration and
Right.
turning in on something that we don't cover. But I do have concerns about that, boats pulling into 101 and pulling out of 101. I think
It's 40.
it's 45 where
I think-
Copeland Road
I
hits
think
it,
so.
and then right past that, I don't know if it's where the entrance in is, if it's 45 or 55, I don't know, maybe the applicant might. Is it 55 there?
50.
50,
Yeah,
oh,
it
excuse
goes
me,
to
you're right, yeah, 50.
50 out there.
It used to be 55.
Mhm. Yep,
50.
the Shrine.
Okay.
55
So I
at
guess
Shrine Club.
All right, so I have some concerns about that, but I don't know who the relevant agency, whether we would contact the sheriff's office for that? To see if
They'll tell you to go to Highway Patrol for
they'll tell you
traffic
to go,
stuff.
okay, for traffic study.
Mhm.
So, that might be something that the town wants to look into. As you brought up the tree species, Nellie Stevens holly is a cross between a Chinese holly and a European holly. And there are lots of, native hollies, as well as lots of other native, screening trees. And so I would like, when we talk about it, to consider making that a requirement that native species are used and that there be more than just the one. Do you know the buffer width? So there's a certain amount of distance from the property line where it's gonna be set aside, I guess it'll be grass for
21
ditch
foot.
maintenance. And then there's another distance set aside for the plantings before we get to the chain link fence. And I didn't see a detail, or I couldn't, make out what
There is
the.
a small item. It's not on this screenshot of it, but it identifies a 21-foot wide landscaping buffer
Okay.
to include the
Ah, yes.
fencing.
6 foot tall, okay. And of those 21 feet, do we know how many feet of that will be the planted buffer and how much will be the ditch access? Which I imagine will be like a ditch access gravel road or something?
I believe it varies around the project. Some of it, he's got the whole ditch on his property. Some of it, he's got half the ditch on the property. So it wiggles a little bit.
Okay. All right, and hold on, I think I had one more. I guess that's all the questions I have for you.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any questions for staff? All right,
All right.
thank you.
Obviously still be available as we need it, but like to have Mr. Owens and Mr. Wade come up and chat with you guys a little bit about the project.
Thank you. And if you could state your name and address for us.
Good evening, John Wade with Rendell Engineers, 1004 Rendell Street, Moorhead. To the member that brought up concerns about the airport, Mr. Owens actually did contact the airport manager with the site plan, who provided a response that the proposed development of this property as seen on the plan here will not, will not conflict with any of the potential airport expansion. And then regarding your question concerning traffic counts and acceleration, deceleration, that is one item that NCDOT does look into when you apply for a driveway permit. They will look at the proposed use of that property and use their calculations for that use to determine a annual daily vehicle count. With that being said, they did issue driveway permits for both the Copeland Road access and the highway, or in the NC 101 driveway entrances. So Mr. Owens does have both of those driveway permits in hand today. Regarding, the 21-foot landscape buffer, that was an agreement that I think Mr. Owens made with the town to be able to work with the existing drainage ditches that are on the property. One, to be able to maintain them, but also to be able to give him some space to maintain both the vegetation of the buffer and possibly even, the chain link fence if necessary.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's where that comes up. The issue is, all the ditches were in place. We didn't dig any. We opened some up that needed opening. But some of the ditches, like on Copeland Road side, for instance, the ditch begins, well, the property begins about 3 feet on the other side of the ditch. So when you take 21 feet to get back, the service road you spoke about will just be dirt. It won't be gravel. That's just to get in there to maintain the ditches, maintain the buffer, and that's it.
Okay.
So,
No, go ahead.
what would a section of that buffer look like? Are we looking at ditch, hollies, chain link fence road?
So if we think about it from, let's say the ditch is centered on the property line, and we've got 21 feet off that property line, we're gonna have chain link fence at the far end of that 21 foot, our vegetated buffer, which is gonna be 6-7 feet wide. So now we're 7 feet off of that 21 foot distance. So now we're at 14, so that 14 feet is going to encompass both the drainage ditch as well as just graded land so that vehicles, lawnmowers, things like that can get out and maintain that area between the fence line and the property line.
And on some of the buffer, if it falls on the other side of the ditch, I left all those trees that fall, I'm not gonna take those out, because they're on the other side, you'd be in someone's backyard where it drains into the ditch. So I'm leaving all that, I didn't disturb those, it was just coming across the ditch to this side to get the service road. There is no way to encompass this property and get to the ditches without going through somebody's front and backyard that surrounds this whole property. So they have no way, there's no way to maintain those unless you go through current property owner's front and backyard to get to the ditches.
So you're saying that within 21 feet behind the fence to your property, fence 21 feet away is the property line.
Yes, sir.
And you're gonna be able to plant whatever kind of hollies, Nellie Stevens,
Right.
get 10 foot in diameter. And you're gonna be able to get in there and maintain the ditch from your side?
In some cases, it's not the same all the way around this property. Some of the ditches, like this side here, on the back side of Riverside, the ditches don't fall on the other side per se, the whole length. It's kind of squirrely per se. I'm gonna have to walk it as I go, because it's different everywhere. The ditches, the way they're laid out here. This small section over here, where the ditch falls, the property goes back another, it doesn't even show the ditch on this map, but the property goes back another 50 feet. 40, 50 feet.
How are you gating the entrances? Key code, or is it a key code?
Yeah, it'll be a key.
Where will the gates be located?
The gates will be located inside the service road, so you tell me.
I can't tell anything from the site plan, because one, I can't read it, it's too small, and it doesn't show enough stuff. But if you could tell me where the gates will be, so I know that the trucks and boats will be off the road.
Correct. The gate coming off Copeland Road will not be until the property opens up. Here on the north side, you can see it says a retractable gate, 20 foot wide.
I can't see that. No.
Okay. Well, it's winter.
Yeah. And the parcel to your
And
right,
then over here, coming off 101, same thing, the retractable gate will
I
not
see
be
that
until the
one.
property opens.
Yeah, it won't be at the road, it's gonna be
of course,
deep
should
inside,
be,
yeah.
yeah. And the unused portion of the property, I'm not familiar with the property, that's to the right when you come off, I guess that's Copeland Road to the south of this thing. Might be 101, I can't tell. But where there's no parking spaces, what is that gonna be used for?
Well, that is gonna be used, it's being used for, it's piled right now with stumps and debris, but it will be used eventually. For same thing, for parking.
For boat storage parking,
Yeah.
you should have shown.
And you have on there that it's gonna be potential construction of future buildings. Will you-
Potentially, but that may or may not.
So plans to hook into
That-
water,
that-
sewer, or no?
No, we'll need more.
Storage buildings?
But, and there may be canopies, but that may or may not happen, because the biggest problem we got is the soils out here and need the permanent surface. So I don't know how that would work out.
Driveway, is it gravel paved?
It's gravel.
Gravel.
The only concrete aprons will be coming off the highway, so
Okay.
your tires don't spin. That's.
Boat
the-
parking spaces, all crushing roads.
Grass.
Grass.
All grass. Everything's gonna be grass. And the road's gonna be 2-track roads, like the old farm roads, 2 tracks of rock.
We did have discussion with the fire department and are installing a 6-inch water line with a fire hydrant off of Copeland Road to meet their requests.
And where will signage be advertising this? I'm asking because there is another new boat storage facility where Live Oak runs into 70. A very nice, tidy looking facility.
Yeah.
But their sign, in my opinion, looks like Wendy's.
No, it's not. It's gonna be,
So-
we do a sign, it's gonna be a low sign.
I
It's gonna
just-
be a
I-
low- It's not gonna be, no, it's not gonna be.
I think that's something that the board should recommend as a condition.
A monument sign?
One of the planning board members mentioned at our most recent meeting, and I think it was a fair comment, that once you don't have to go very far from Front Street for Beaufort to start looking not so charming. And so I think having signage, the type of sign you just
Yeah,
described,
it's not gonna be on
Mr.
steel posts
So-
up and out.
that's
You
right.
don't need it because you'll be passing by.
Yes, but something that's in character with Beaufort, I think is something that we want to ensure is the type of signage we have for new businesses. So, I trust that that's what you
Oh,
plan to have,
yeah.
but I think that's something that we should, when we're looking at applications, that we should perhaps recommend that the Board of Commissioners consider as a condition.
How tall do you think your sign would be?
I'm gonna
Let's
guess
say
4 feet.
4 feet?
I'm gonna say 5 feet.
5 foot max.
5 foot max.
All right.
Just a low entrance
Yeah.
sign.
Okay.
And I have looked at the drawings at the airport, they're preliminary, but when they move this runway, it's gonna catch the existing runway now, so they gotta keep, obviously, they gotta keep that in a straight line. The airport has bought the property on the corner where you turn into Copeland Road. I don't even know if they're gonna change that angle there, because it's gonna move further north south of, I can't remember the name of the cemetery, but north of us, and it's gonna come back in and tie into the bypass. So this is gonna be a dead end, as well as 101 will dead end coming out of Beaufort. That's how it's gonna have to, because of where the runway's gotta run. So.
And can you talk again about the landscape plan? So we're using hollies, and they're going 6 feet on center, but what size hollies are we putting in?
Right now, they're proposed to be Nellie Stevens hollies, and off the top of my head, I'm not sure how tall those grow, but I know they're typically used as a landscaping buffer. There are some other evergreens that we're looking into, including green giant arborvitaes and Spartan junipers, as well as Hetz columnar.
And I have no problem planting different species, because if we get a blight, I don't wanna lose everything I got. So I'd rather bust it up than.
You
I would
figure out how to
just
kill one of those Nelly Stevens, you'll have done something. They're all good choices, you just said, they all get large, they all get dense, and on a 6-foot spacing, they're gonna grow together.
Yeah.
And a
And
Nelly
6
Stevens-
and
a Nelly Stevens holly will get over time very tall.
Yeah.
I just, I don't have any great concerns, except that you're asking for a permit based off a site plan, you're asking for a recommendation from the board. You said ultimately you'd like to have boat parking storage in the spot that doesn't have any spaces shown. if I had to recommend this, I would recommend it based on what I see, and if you amend it later, you gotta come back. So that's just how we play this game correctly. I do have some concerns about maintaining ditches. We all know you gotta clean them out once in a while. You got hollies, and a fence, and I don't know how you get a track go there if you ever gotta clean them out. It's gonna be tight, you know that. But this board, we've got a couple new folks, and we just look at whether or not this is in harmony with the plans and the neighborhoods around it, the Board of the Board of Commissioners, you know, that's when it'll get a notice put on there. Then the neighbors will all know whether
Right.
we talk to them or not. That's not our purview. I would just say that the plan we're considering is that one, and you can't amend it later without changing, and coming back to see the board.
Based on that comment, though, this is a special use permit, and we can make recommendations
We
to
can
the
make
commissioners
recommendations, yeah, sure.
as to what we think should or shouldn't be included in the special
And
use
they can make
permit.
them conditions to the permit, yes.
Right.
Correct. All right, does anyone else have any questions of the applicant at this time? All right, thank you very much.
Thank y'all.
All right, yeah, so as a special use permit, we can, as we have dealt with recently, in other instances, we can attach suggested conditions for the commissioners to review on this property. So I think now is we should have a discussion on what, if any, conditions we would like to see applied.
Ryan, for me, I want to add on to what you discussed in terms of having a landscape plan that includes a variety of native plants. I think that Nellie Stevens hollies look nice, but they are a cultivar. So I think that whether they're included or not, I think looking at having a specific plan for landscaping, both the installation and the ongoing maintenance, that includes a variety of North Carolina native shrubs and trees.
Yeah, that sounds, yeah, that's exactly what I had in mind.
So to expand upon that, if there is a landscape plan, I would like to see where the ditches run on which area, and how are they gonna maintain them if the ditch comes close to the fence and then widens away, if they have to go through somebody else's property?
So I was thinking about that, and, you know, the fact that their buffer sort of meanders, you know, and it won't be 21 feet everywhere because of the limitations of when they dug the ditches, they didn't dig them very straight. We could probably say that the buffers will be typically 21 feet with 6 feet of vegetative area, which, you know, subject to the lay of the land, or I don't know, is there a better way to say, you know,
Topography.
subject to the topography? I don't know how many feet, you know, if you have the ditches is all on your property, that's a certain number of feet of ditch. Then you
Right.
need enough grass to get a tractor through with the blade. You know, so 21 feet may not be quite enough in some places, so.
So do we need to come up with all of that wording to hand it to the commissioners, or can we suggest that they come back to us with a landscape plan?
So I don't know if it would be onerous for them to come up with such a detailed layout, you know, that, oh, we have 21 feet here, and here we have 17 feet, and here we have 12 feet, and here we have 24 feet,
Right?
you know, to get someone to survey down to foot, and, I mean, that could
But-
be given a property of this size, that could be a pretty major undertaking.
But we could recommend to the council
To the
for them to present to the council with their plan
A
attached to
plan.
it.
Right.
because we have concerns that
Right.
some areas won't be maintainable by a lawnmower.
Well, they're gonna need a certain number of feet inside of the ditch to run a tractor down, and then they're gonna need a certain number of feet of landscaping, and then a fence. And I don't know, in some places, it's gonna take more than 21 feet. So,
Then what happens? I know I've
Yeah,
worked in
yeah.
a subdivision out here that I won't mention, that there is a ditch and it's between two properties, but the town can't get in there to maintain it.
yeah.
And that's the town maintaining it.
So we could, and I don't, if staff has any ideas here, feel free to chime in, but we could recommend that the boundaries have a plan where they will have X number of feet of maintenance space inside of the ditch, followed by X number of feet of landscaping, followed by the fence. So where they say there's a 21-foot landscape buffer, it might be nominally 21 feet, or the median buffer would be 21 feet, but in some places, they might need less in some places, because in some places the ditch is all on the neighbor, and in some places they might need more. So I think that might be a flexible way to put it where everybody gets what they need. You just say, it will have, the buffer will have enough room for maintenance, and it'll have 6 feet of vegetation and a fence.
And one of my concerns is that down the road,
Oh, yes, so the ditch, the space to maintain the ditch, which will be, maintained, although I imagine those ditches probably haven't been cleaned out in 50 years.
they cleaned them out already.
I know someone who backed up to one of those ditches years ago, and it was kind of a snarl.
Can I
But-
ask Mr. Owens a question?
Yeah.
Mr. Owens, are any of these ditches, public property, like it'll be turned over to the state or the county to maintain? The whole perimeter's all private?
No, I don't see any way, because it's in the backyard, the Corps of Engineers, we went through them, we went through
If
Canada.
you,
Yeah,
just
can you go
come
to, can you go to the mic so it can be recorded, sir? Thank you.
Yeah, so people online can hear us. If we have any viewers.
Yeah, we went through the Corps of Engineers and CAMA on the ditches, and they did not claim any of the ditches. So
Okay.
I don't see any way that I know of that the town or the state's gonna claim them, because you would have to go through somebody's yard. That's the problem. You gotta go through somebody's yard on every ditch.
Correct.
So, and the other issue, probably 70–80% of them fall completely on my property. This was a farm at one time. I don't remember when it was farmed, but it was farmed, and I guess the farmer dug them for what he needed. And then when they started selling off the lots around it, I guess he kept the ditches because he wanted to maintain them for his farm. That's what I'm assuming.
Okay. So it sounds like it won't fall back on
No,
the
and the
town
town,
or
I
the,
know.
or the county or the state, so.
And there are private ditches in town that the town does not maintain.
Right.
Will not maintain.
Okay.
Is this in, tell me again, is this in the ETJ?
ETJ?
Yeah. So it's absolutely not a town issue to maintain?
No.
Maybe in the corporate limits and the right circumstances, but not in the ETJ.
Sir, did you consider doing it, I mean, you have roughly a dozen or more adjacent property owners and homes. Did you consider trying to do it without an access on Copeland?
No, I would like to use both accesses. You've only got, on Copeland Road, I think you've got a church and 2 houses before you get to my Copeland Road entrance. I think it's just 2 houses.
And for your design engineer, what is the width of the entrance off Copeland and 101?
20,
Those are each 20 foot,
20 foot.
20 foot.
20 foot wide drive aisles,
No, the actual width of both of
within
them
20 foot radius.
is about 60 feet. You're talking about the drives to go in?
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I think.
With the radius, it'd be 60 total. It's a 20 foot wide drive aisle with
So you can
a
get a
20
40 foot boat
radius.
trailer and a 20 foot.
Oh,
truck.
yeah, we're gonna make the road 20 feet, but the whole width of the entrance is about one's about 70 and one's about 65, I think.
Okay.
So I also have concerns about pulling in from 101, and I don't know how to address that, right? Obviously, they were given a driveway permit.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that. Does that mean it's a safe way to get into the property? And who makes that call?
DOT.
I would say DOT
Yeah,
makes that
it was
call.
DOT.
Yeah. I share your concerns because it's, I don't know if they looked at, cars and trucks pulling out of here is one thing, but pulling a trailer tends to be slower. But, I don't know that we have any, that's sort of doesn't fall
Right,
under our
so
purview.
DOT looked at this site as boat storage.
As a boat storage.
Trucks bringing in boats on trailers, parking them, leaving, grabbing them, going to the marina, putting them in. Their calculations, a boat storage facility like this is one of the least trafficked commercial designations that they have.
It does seem to have pretty good sight lines and it's pretty
Yeah,
flat.
that's right.
So you should be able to see someone pulling out from a ways.
We're kind of hoping more of trailer storage. People that's got boats in the boathouse
Mm-hmm.
or on a lift. And the only time, for the biggest part, that's what we're hoping for, they'll just come in there and get it when we have a hurricane. So they don't have to carry it back to Raleigh or Greensboro. So that's why it's gonna be grass slots.
Okay. Makes sense.
So just out of curiosity then, whenever people park boat trailers on grass, the grass grows up through the boat trailer. If you have 277 boat trailers.
It's a lot of weed eating. They do it around my
Yeah,
office
how do you
every
mow
week.
grass?
Do it with a weed eater, they do it around my office. It's a lot of work, but it's gotta be weed eated.
You're gonna need goats.
And it's gonna be segregated with railroad ties, each lot, with signage within the lots.
Right.
Yes, the only way you can maintain it, it's that or rock, and I didn't wanna get into that pervious surface, so.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right, so we talked about tree species as a condition. We sort of talked about this, but monument signage not to exceed 5 feet high. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah.
And I think a rendering, I would recommend that the Board of Commissioners have a rendering of the sign, not necessarily the full-fledged design, but at least
A
the,
sketch?
that's right, of
Okay.
the size.
Alicia's limits.
That's normally required.
Suggests the square footage, I don't know about height.
Suggested.
Yeah.
Well,
The
yeah,
sign ordinance, we're gonna have to get for that.
Yeah,
I
and
don't expect Michelle to know off the top of her head, but what would the signage square footage minimum, maximum be without us? But
It's
1 square foot per linear.
thank
they
you.
don't have much frontage.
Don't think I'm 100 feet.
It's 2 linear feet based on your road frontage. That's your total, you figure your total signage is 2 square feet based on your road frontage.
So up to
And the only road frontage they have are the entrances off of Highway 101 and Copeland Road. And those signs would be small.
60 feet each.
But as staff, I would ask that not necessarily that the person give you a rendering, but as mentioned, if you wanted a monument type sign, that you do put some limit on the height of it of a maximum of something like 6 feet by whatever, and then go from there.
Sounds reasonable.
You said 2 square feet per linear foot?
Per linear foot of frontage.
100 square feet of sign.
Well, 120, because it's 60
Yeah, 160.
feet per each, so.
Yeah, each sign is 6.
So maybe 5 by 10,
Not to exceed.
not to
5 by
exceed
10.
5 feet high by 10 feet wide. 50,
4 by 8.
4 by 8. Whatever the pleasure of the board is.
Again, I'm not as concerned about the size as I am the
The
signs
aesthetic
that
of
are installed on new businesses being in keeping with the character of Beaufort going forward.
Well, then we can ask for an image of the sign. I mean, that's pretty standard procedure on a commercial site plan.
With,
Yeah, the townhomes had to do that. They had to think about their size.
image for Board of Commissioners. Okay. Monument sign not to exceed 4 feet by, what did you say, Jeff? 4 feet by
Right?
4 by 8.
by 8 foot, and I would say
Each
per entrance,
Yes.
per entrance with image for VOC. All right.
Okay, we haven't really addressed, I don't think, the buffer wording, how we're gonna turn it over to the commissioners, but based on previous applications that we've gone through, there should be a time limit on the special use permit, because suppose they approve all the buffer zone, they plant it all gets overgrown in weeds, and nobody does anything to maintain it. A renewal of the special use permit would give the town the authority to compel the maintenance of the buffer and the ditches.
It would.
It's also making the town a police department, right?
It is.
But the alternative is what? The ditches could get overgrown and the
Yeah.
landscape could
do
turn
that.
brown and die, and there's no recourse.
And in all due sincerity, the permit is approved by the Board of Commissioners with
Mhm.
conditions.
Right.
It's the
Right.
staff's job kind of make sure that those conditions persist with the permit because they run with it.
But I don't know that the town, well, that's true. I don't know that the town
That's the
has
process.
what recourse. I mean, I know there's there's landscape down the street from me that half the landscape has died since they put in the stuff, and it looks pretty bleak.
That's where if I use the words installation and maintenance.
Installation and maintenance.
Mr. Chairman, I believe your attorney would like to
Ah.
share some thoughts.
I do, and I'm glad my attorney spoke up for me. Thank you.
Sorry, need to get you a gavel.
Vic, I appreciate your comment on the length of the permit and an automatic expiration. The other alternative is to just revoke the permit if you've got an enforcement issue. And let me tell you why they are equivalent procedures. Since this is a special use permit, if the permit expires, the applicant would have to go back through the quasi-judicial process with the Board of Commissioners to essentially extend the permit or get another one. If the town wanted to revoke the permit because there were, let's just call it catastrophic failures of the conditions, then we'd have to go through the quasi-judicial process to do it. So my thought would be, you're gonna be confronted with going back through that process if there's a violation, one way or the other, whether you renew the permit or not. So, if we don't put an expiration date on it and they do what they're supposed to do, we might not have to touch it again. And it would be less onerous on the applicant and the property owner, but we still have in our pocket, we can revoke the permit. I mean, we can enforce it and do something about it, no doubt about it. And since it's a equivalent process, I'd say let's try to, not do it unless we absolutely have to. That would be my thought.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. Well, that's good that I didn't realize that once granted, the permits could be revoked for cause.
For violation.
Yeah, but any land use approval that the town gives generally can be revoked.
Okay.
And that's controlled by 160D very specifically. There's a hierarchy of enforcement mechanisms, and of course, we incorporated all that into our ordinance. But, you know, an approval that's quasi-judicial in nature, the statute is clear. To change it, to amend it, or to revoke it, you have to go back through the same process. I mean, if it was a, zoning permit, just a garden variety, you can do it at the staff level and things like that. But for a revocation, you've got to follow the same path, which is, in this case, quasi-judicial. So, if you read it literally, if there was a complaint, it would come back to this board. It would follow the same process. This board would make a recommendation to the commissioners. This is what we think you should do, and then the commissioners would have the hearing and come to whatever the decision is.
Thank you, Art.
Okay. So then it seems like what we need to address is the buffering. What is the wording or how do we know what the plantings are going to be, that they are going to be maintained, and that there's adequate ability to get in there to maintain them, and what species?
I mean, it's a good question. So, I would think, I believe we need to let the applicant know what we're expecting, and then maybe leave it to them to come up with a better description of how they're going to implement what we would like to see,
Those are my thoughts.
rather than us try to dictate it
Right.
without such a good feel for the truth on the ground out there. If I'm correct, I think what we would like to see is within the ditch, there needs to be enough room to maintain the ditch. And then beyond that, there needs to be a sufficient area of landscaping for the landscaping plan, and then a fence. And 21 feet may,
That's what the staff recommended, something like that to us.
recognize
Yeah.
important, okay.
To be part of the permit.
Yeah, so,
Yeah,
So
so
they
the
did-
staff
so-
recommended it.
So I think in some places you will need more than 21 feet, and in some places you might need less than 21 feet. So, but as long as there's space to maintain the ditch and space for the buffer and the fence, I think that would satisfy what we're looking for.
Just to say that, there needs to be space?
There needs to
or-
be, well, a certain distance. I think you could say, I don't know how much, whatever number of feet that it takes for a tractor to make it by the ditch, to maintain it, plus 6 feet as the alternate.
Let's hear from the engineer.
Unless do you have ideas?
I was with y'all up to that.
I mean, yeah, I think we want to see that there's room to maintain the ditch, that there's room for the buffer, so
Right,
that
agreed.
people don't have to see a field of boats in their backyard for long. And I think that's, and there's there's that opaque fence. And recognizing that that's not gonna be 21 feet everywhere. It might be more than 21 feet in some places because.
But it won't
of-
be less than 21 feet anywhere.
No, well, I could see if the ditch is all the way off your property, which I think you said it might be in a few places.
I think the rules call for 21 feet.
21 feet, okay, well then at least 21 feet. At least, and recognizing that in some places where the ditch is all the way on your property, it may need to be more than 21, depending on how much, do you know how much room you need for a tractor to maintain the
I
ditches?
could probably use a mini excavator. The worst spot, worst area probably is, the highest, is gonna be this one on Copeland Road.
Parallel to Copeland Road?
Yeah, that falls, the ditch, the other side of the ditch falls, if I guess, 3 feet on the other side.
Mhm.
And it's got trees, and then it starts the backyard, and I left those, but that's the worst. The one behind, the Copeland Road development, whatever they call it, Graham Lane, I call it.
Parallel to Graham Lane.
That one, the ditch is like this, so you gotta stake over, and that's a main drainage ditch.
Okay.
And then the other ditches, you got like 3 ditches that run up the center of this property. You actually catch the drainage on the other side of 101 from the airport. It comes across the state right of way, goes in these ditches, and it falls out of that northwest corner. The problem is downstream, I think over the years, they have not kept that clean. The farmer, when he farmed it, evidently drained it to Newport River.
Mm-hmm.
So it lays in there for the most part, which is fine, it's big enough to hold it, and they hadn't had a problem with it. And then you got a ditch on the front side, but it stops on the right after you come in off of 101, I think it stops about 100 feet down and ties into another drainage ditch that takes it across the field in the bottom. That's why the layouts are difficult, because I'm gonna leave the ditches where they are. I don't wanna move any
Right.
ditches, I don't wanna cover any ditches. So I'm trying to make this thing work in between the ditches that I have, plus that we needed to hold the water for everybody.
All right. So, do you think it would be sufficient to say room? Oh, we have an expert opinion.
Mr. Chairman, my recommendation would be the board ask the applicant to, on their site plan, modify it to give you a typical section of what the buffer would look like. And maybe they give you two, one for areas of what would typically be seen based on width, and then others. That way, you have an exact, or not an exact, but you have an idea. And when it says typical, remember, typical could be in and out, but at least that would give you something, and I think that would help clear a lot of things that y'all have been going over for the last 30 minutes regarding this buffer area.
I'd like to make a recommendation that the applicant come back with a landscape plan showing the buffer along a typical cross-section of a landscape buffer, and we'll reconvene at our next meeting.
And I think we would also like to see the variety of species to be used in that buffer, right?
That's fine.
Yeah.
So,
Access and how the ditch will be maintained, how access will be achieved to the ditch.
all right, so rather than making suggestions and forwarding on to commissioners, you wanna
See a cross-section of the landscape plan.
see it back here next month?
I think all those things are important, but I guess where I disagree, I could see that what was just described, going to the Board of Commissioners
Mm-hmm.
to opine on, as opposed to coming back to us.
All right.
But then are we doing our job, or we're just passing it on to the commissioners and now they have to say?
I think we're doing our job by passing on, here's what we believe the Board of Commissioners need to see before they vote to approve or deny this.
I'll agree.
So,
I will-
so let's take a quick, you wanna do a quick
I'll
show?
withdraw my motion.
Okay. All right. Well, then,
That was easy.
okay. Well, then, we'll move on with things that we would suggest for the commissioners. to
The
take up
conditions.
In their conditions in their next meeting. And for the buffering, Kyle has made a recommendation that we ask the applicant to bring to the commissioners some typical cross sections of the buffering along with a landscape plan and suggested species, North Carolina native species.
I think Jeff's recommendations were spot on. Like I said, just where I differ is in my opinion, I don't think it needs to come back to the planning board next month. I think Jeff's recommendations, we need that, but
As a condition for the board.
Yes.
we need that as a recommendation or a condition for what what we believe the Board of Commissioners need to see.
And I would support Jeff's position because I believe it's our responsibility to sort this out. We've already had all the discussion. If we dump it on the commissioners' laps, they don't know where they're going or what the discussion was.
That's a fair comment.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. So I think we have covered conditions related to signage, to landscaping, and to buffers. And I don't know, were there any other concerns that we needed to cover? I don't believe I heard any. So at this point, we need to put this in the form of a motion. Would anyone care to try that, or?
I motion that we forward this to the Board of Commissioners with the conditions that a site plan be provided, that they are convinced that the ditches may be adequately maintained, and that the sign at each entrance of Copeland and 101 be less than 4 by 8 or less.
And that the landscaping be provided by a mix of North Carolina native species.
Sure, that too.
Did you get that?
What was the last part?
And that the landscaping be provided with a mix of North Carolina native species. All right.
Second.
We have a second. Any further discussion?
No.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Marbles it is.
Yeah.
You
All
won't
right.
see it from up with an airplane.
Like my wax myrtles. Diana. All right. So on to board comments, and I forget which way we went, so we'll start with
I
Jeff.
have none, sir.
All right, Becky.
No comments.
No comments?
All right.
This is, what, the third one that's come before us with entrances and egresses onto the two major highways of town. Is there a way we can put in, like, Mr. Owens and his architect, engineer there, got the permits from the state?
Yes, I can provide those.
And then, so then I don't have to ask the question every time, well, what about the
Yes.
180 boats, 100?
Well, in all due sincerity, these folks have done thousands of these.
They
things,
have, right.
And they're both NCDOT roads.
Mm-hmm.
They're far more stringent than what the town can be. And it's their road and their condition. I have, if they've got a permit, I throw my
Right.
hands up.
It'd just be nice
If
that,
they think it's a turning lane is required for commercial property, they're gonna be the first one to say so. So
But that-
I'm good as long as they have a driveway permit.
yeah, just so we know they have that, they did that step. They
Okay.
went into it and,
Yes,
Yeah, so if it was
absolutely.
noted in
Okay.
the packet.
There's
there.
there's a lot of technical items that they provide that we look at TRC and at the staff level, and then kind of bring you guys the bigger items. So that's something that we can either identify in the staff report or even send to you if you look at it and say like, hey, I see this is missing. That's something we
Right.
can absolutely provide.
I mean, you just have to mention, I mean, you don't have to have the permit in there, but just, yeah, they went ahead, got with DOT and the permit was issued, their DOT's fine with it, so.
All right. Thank you. I'd like to thank staff for their great work, and whenever we get these special use applications, it's always a special meeting. And with that, I'll, staff comments? Or staff report?
I'll make this quick, Mr. Chairman, I promise. And I would first like to thank all of you who participated with our UDO consultant. I think that those meetings went exceptionally well. Michelle's done a great job in leading Tyson Smith and his firm, White and Smith, on this process so far, and we're hoping to have a Zoom meeting or video conference with them on Friday to get an update. But a lot of good comments. Some, of course, were unable to attend, Mr. Fasolino, but we still had your comments, so I wanted everyone to realize that his comments were incorporated. But I think that process has gotten off to a great start. Of course, it already had gotten off to a great start because our legal counsel had already done the 160D update for us, so that was one thing we didn't have to worry about. So we're looking forward to having some of that in the future, of more conversation and so forth. Mr. Patton, real quick on some of the transportation issues. That's a little, sometimes an applicant will already have a permit, and sometimes they will not. And sometimes they will have a permit without showing DOT what the use would be. And then, even though they have a permit, they have to go back and get it revised. So sometimes things are a little in flux there. These folks were ahead of the game. They were ahead of the curve, as Mr. Rungenhill mentioned earlier. In other projects where there are not permits issued, the DOT will be part of our technical review committee. So that's one time where, even though we don't have the power necessarily to say this is what we want, we can support DOT in saying we'd like stronger things here, like a turn lane or so forth. And they generally go along with us because if it's in our jurisdiction, they realize that we're the boots on the ground. So, so just be aware of that. We'll try to get that information to you in the future, but just realize that not every application is going to have that, but we'll let you know if it's got one or not.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Anything to add? All right. Well, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion we adjourn.
Second.
I second.
All right, all in favor? All
Aye.
opposed? We're adjourned. Thank Thank you all for showing up. Yeah.